Lyons, question is the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Indi.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Tax. Tax has been the hot topic of conversation around the barbecues of North East Victoria this summer. Tax, how it's raised, how it's spent and what the government does with it. And it's time to get honest about tax, tax reform and honest about the need for regional Australia to be included in any conversation about tax. And tonight I call on the government, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer to stay the course and to give us, the people of rural and regional Australia, the information we need about tax reform. In March 2015, I tabled in this place my private member's bill, the Charter of Budget Honesty Amendment, Regional Australia Statement Bill 2015. This bill called on the government to ensure that regional impact statements are prepared and accompany every budget every year. This amendment bill addresses my election commitment to stand up for people who live in regional Australia, who already pay their fair share of tax and have a vested interest in how this tax is spent. And many feel they are disadvantaged because of the lack of taxpayer money invested in regional public transport, regional mobile phone coverage, regional internet and regional creation of innovation, employment and educational opportunities. The topic of tax and how it's spent goes to the very heart of regional living. The main purpose of this bill was to ensure that the framework for the conduct of government budgetary policy, which includes obligations on the government to regular financial reporting, should include regional Australia statements. And these statements would be publicly released with each mid-year economic and financial outlet report, as well as with the budget. The central pillar of the Charter of Budget Honesty Bill is for these who live in rural and regional Australia to have the information to allow them to make an assessment of the impact of government policy decisions on regional Australia. Such statements would acknowledge and account for the impact government decisions have on people who live in regional Australia, and they would help improve the knowledge and understanding of the impact of fiscal and budgetary measures upon regional communities. The Charter of Budget Honesty would keep the government honest on the tax revenue coming in from regional Australia and honest about reporting of where the expenditure is going and the degree to which it benefits people and families and businesses and farmers in regional Australia. It's important to stress here that when I refer to rural and regional, I'm not only referring to farming or agriculture. I'm also referring to the over 80,000 of my constituents who live in rural towns and small villages. Including these statements is not a new idea. It's my understanding that they have been a feature of every budget since 1996-97, except for the 1 year in 2006 and 7, and then until the budget of 2013 and 14. These statements need to be returned because they are missed and they are needed. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is strong community consensus in rural and regional North East Victoria about the broad framework and the justification of taxation. There's a strong understanding and recognition of the government's role and responsibility to collect and redistribute tax based around an agreed set of values and behaviour, and every 3 years an opportunity for the people to elect the party whose policies are generally considered in line with the community's values and expectations. But as people gathered around the barbecues on the glorious summer evenings this year, we talked about the GST, the ramifications of an increase and an extension, or the possible extension, of better health services, the ramifications of an increase of the GST to health services, food and education. They talked of the need for fairness in the tax system and the sense of unease when the big companies, the multinationals, are seen to not be paying their fair share. They talked of housing prices and wondered whether negative gearing was having a negative impact on the housing market. They talked about superannuation and shared stories of people they knew who didn't have enough and how hard things would be if you couldn't get a pension, had to work till you were 70 or were a self-funded retiree. They also talked about others who had very profitable schemes and could live very comfortably, thank you, on the interest gained from these investments. Surely they could afford to pay tax on those earnings, they asked. The conversations also skirted around the role of government in delivering appropriate goods and services, and if people would be prepared to pay more tax if that meant better services, better access to higher education, improved infrastructure, particularly trains, telecommunications, mobile phone and internet. And no barbecue was ever complete without stories of government waste, poor decision-making and the frustration at poor administration. No one wanted more of that. There was a belief that considered and productive reform is needed of our tax system. We need better outcomes, not just raising more tax to spend more money. We need outcome-based taxation. And against a background of general chatter, I have to say there is a level of discord. Things are not going well from the people's perspective about tax, and reform, the general belief, is well and truly overdue. There is interest, and from many people it's eager interest, for improvement in the taxation system and the distribution of tax. There's also an interest in the process of policy making. How about a green paper, a white paper and policy produced through the budget? Processes would result in a much more fairer taxation system, better targeted support and a government focusing on its core business, with particular focus on facilitating infrastructure, transport, telecommunications, education, defence, trade and managing foreign affairs, as well as maintaining a fair social welfare safety net. There's so much that needs to be done in rural Australia, so many areas where people living experience disadvantage. This leads them to a belief that the taxation system is not working for them, that it is not fair. And that's why the private members' bill calling for an amendment to the Charter of Budget Honesty Act by including regional statements is so important. It would provide the facts, it would give the evidence and ensure that policy is based on data. The facts about information flow, which would allow these facts, would give us the information which would allow the assessment of the impact and the likely economic, social, cultural and environmental impacts on regional Australia, and the result of key initiatives and progress made in implementing these key government initiatives. These statements would tell us what impact is being had, what outcomes are being reached, and are we successfully addressing the problems that we have identified. The Act calls for regional statements to have regard to economic drivers of regional communities and the disproportional effect that government initiatives may have in regional communities due to lack of infrastructure, including particularly mobile phone coverage, internet connections, access to public transport, the lack of access that people in regional communities have to government services due to costs and long travel distance and times, and the effect that lack of competition in regional communities has on our cost of living, and particularly in doing business in regional communities, and the cost and difficulty involved in complying with regulatory requirements for people and business. And one particular topic I'd like to just bring to the attention of the House, and there's this bill before the House at the moment, the Jobs for Families childcare packages. But this morning we had Delete's Access Economics give us the results, their analysis of the impact of this, and particularly on rural and regional Australia. And the impact is just enormous. But to me it seems just so wrong that we should have a private enterprise consultancy business doing this study. It should come out of the department. The Department of Education is putting this bill up. They should be responsible for making sure that the negative impacts and the positive impacts on rural and regional people are noted, and that people understand that it's going to have a huge negative impact on us. So, in bringing this to a sort of conclusion, I have to say that in 2015 the government did not ignore that bill. In fact, in the 2015-2016 budget papers there was a most welcome addition, the Blue Book, called Partnership for Regional Growth. And this Blue Book was a joint statement by the Honourable Warren Truss, Deputy MP, Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development, and also the Honourable Jamie Briggs, at that time Assistant Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development. And this Blue Book provides an overview of current and new initiatives, under all the topics that are cover off: agriculture, Attorney-General's, defence, education, employment, environment, foreign affairs and trade, health, human services, immigration and border protection, industry and science, infrastructure and regional development, PM&C, social service, treasuries and veterans affairs. It's a great description of projects that are or programs operating. But sadly, this book does not do what was really asked of it. And what's missing? There's no detail of budget initiatives, no impact statements or analysis of the economic drivers for regional communities and the disproportionate effect that government initiatives have in rural communities due to lack of infrastructure and associated problems. There's no mention of our ability to grow business. There's no mention of what the impact is that we're trying to have. There's no mention of outcomes. There's no mention of have we had success. All there is a description, here's the money, and no accounting at all about what we want done with it. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I believe that there's an opportunity now, as we prepare for the next budget, for the Prime Minister, for the Treasurer, for the new leadership in the National Party, for the relevant ministers to revisit the content of the Blue Book, to view its contents and its relevance in time for the budget. And to do so would be a wonderful thing. It could ensure that as a community, as we gather around our fires in late autumn and winter, as we're discussing tax and tax reform, we look at how our hard-earned money, our taxes, are being used to build our communities, to bring prosperity, to bring opportunity for all, and how our taxpayer money and government initiatives are actually changing and making a difference, and we have some form of accountability for the outcomes that we want. So, in closing, my call to the Prime Minister and Treasurer is to stay the course on tax reform and to put in an overlay for rural and regional Australia across all the proposals, and then communicate the benefits, the opportunities and the costs to the 1/3 of the population who live outside our capital cities. Thank you.
I thank